arthritis drug Humira doubled in the past 6 years and now costs over $60,000 a year, and that's why top executives at AbbVie and 6 other pharmaceutical giants were grilled today by Senate lawmakers about the rising cost of prescription drugs that have become more unaffordable to more and more Americans. On Wall Street, a plunge in housing starts in December, hitting a 2-year low, helped send the Dow 34 points lower today, the NASDAQ down by 5. Weak earnings after the bell from WW, formerly known as Weight Watchers. That's because of fewer sign-ups in the new year. Also disappointing, Papa John's Pizza, sales down 7%. Consumer confidence, though, higher in February after 4 months in a row of dropping. That's after the government shutdown ended. And after a 30-year absence, the French automaker Peugeot plans to return to the U.S. marketplace. It won't say just when that'll happen, though. Tom Busby, CNBC.
Discount travel sites say they have the best prices, but Hilton.com has the price match guarantee. Look me in the eye. If you find a better rate, they match it and take 25% off. Yeah, well, this is radio, so just stare at the radio. Hilton.com has the best prices. Pinky swear. Or, radio swear. Plus, you can choose your exact room and get free Wi-Fi. Cross my heart, stick a needle in my radio. Expect better. Expect Hilton.
Must be a Hilton Honors member. Applicable terms and conditions at Hilton.com. Pinky swear.
Individuals and businesses with tax problems, listen carefully. If you owe over $10,000 in back taxes or have unfiled tax returns, U.S. Tax Shield can help you take back control. The IRS can seize your bank accounts, garnish your paycheck, close your business, and file criminal charges. Our team of tax attorneys can stop collections and get you protected. U.S. Tax Shield offers a price protection guaranteed quote to get you protected today. U.S. Tax Shield is A+ rated with the BBB, so call 800-466-9625. U.S. Tax Shield, 800-466-9625.
California headline news. Sonoma County is telling residents near the Russian River to evacuate. The river is expected to reach flood stage around 7 p.m. and will crest at nearly 46 feet late Wednesday night. Meanwhile, another storm system is headed to Southern California.
We're expecting that to bring some showers to our area. That would be tonight into Wednesday, and then we could have a chance of showers linger into Thursday morning.
That's meteorologist Lisa Phillips. Attorney General Javier Becerra today released a report on immigration detention facilities in the state. Although experiences can vary, the report found some common issues, including prolonged periods of confinement without breaks and barriers to access legal representation. And Long Beach officials have approached the Angels about the possibility of relocating to a new waterfront stadium. Anaheim spokesperson Mike Leister isn't worried the baseball team could leave.
We don't believe there's a better option for the Angels anywhere else. We've already proven that baseball works here, and we think we can make it even better.
Steve Clausen, California News.
Hard to imagine with so much of the country digging out or scraping off snow and ice, but spring training is well underway.
It's this week's Geico Sports Now.
Play ball! By now, just about every team has had its first full squad workout, heading eventually towards the many practice games ahead of the official opening day next month. Teams are hoping to see nearly 5 million fans come through the spring training turnstiles at the ballpark. Yeah! Go to Geico.com and you could save as much as 15% on your auto insurance in as little as 15 minutes.
You're in the front yard, shovel in hand, about to dig, when a thought crosses your mind.
Was I supposed to call 811 before I start digging? Nah, that's just for excavator dudes.
No, dude, it's for homeowners, too. Before starting any digging project, call 811 2 working days in advance to get all underground lines marked for free. Because natural gas lines and other utilities can be buried anywhere.
Got it. Thanks, deep-voiced narrator.
You're welcome, dude. Brought to you by Southwest Gas.
It's time to say see you later, alligator, to embarrassing and troublesome issues with your skin, nails, and hair with all-natural Cayman alligator oil. Cayman oil is locally made, right in Louisiana, where people have been using alligator oil for centuries to treat all kinds of ailments. A drop a day of Cayman oil can help you say see you later, alligator, to athlete's foot, nail fungus, acne, eczema, rashes, dry skin, cuts, infections, MRSA, scars, burns, sunburns, and even ingrown hair and dandruff. If you or someone you know is tired of suffering with any of these skin, nail, and hair troubles, you need to visit mycayman.com to learn more about 100% natural, non-toxic, hypoallergenic Cayman oil and get a bottle today. Say see you later, alligator, with Cayman alligator oil at mycayman.com. That's mycayman.com. mycayman.com.
Talk 102.3 FM Riverside. Thank you, America, for making us radio's number one format for 8 years. Talk 102.3 FM Riverside. KCAA, the station that leaves no listener behind.
Welcome to Smart Health Talk with your host, Elaine McFadden.
Take a walk on the wild side. Will the birds and the bees survive? Right before me, my newfound hippie side. Once ignored these conspiracies online. Out the window, visions of the earth. Sign me up now, make sure you use your smart. Take a walk on the wild side. Will the birds and the bees survive? Would your children lie to see Mother Nature's side?
Welcome to Smart Health Talk with your host, Elaine McFadden.
Welcome, everyone. I'm smart. This is Smart Health Talk, and I'm Elaine McFadden. So if you were turning your dial looking for us, guess what? You're in the right place. And that means you might as well just not even touch that dial, because we've got a great show for you today. If you love science, then you're probably going to love our show. And if you love your body and like feeling good and don't want to get disease and stay young and active and looking good and all that kind of stuff, then you're probably going to want to stay with us the entire hour as well, because we have Dr. Stephanie Seneff joining us today. She's an MIT senior researcher. She's a senior research scientist. She only hung out among the walls of MIT for around 50 years. Yeah, over in data collection and analysis. And I have so many people. I'm Stephanie Seneff. There are so many people that love her and could listen to her all day long, like me. And then there's other people that seem to want to try to find some way to discredit her when, it's like, excuse me, MIT senior research scientist. I mean, that's not too shabby. That's pretty high up in my book. And why does everyone think that scientists have to be inside labs? That's what I would like to know. Personally, I kind of think of myself as kind of a scientist in a way, being a registered dietitian. And I could have went that way with my master's degree and went and did research on science. But you know what? I'm a people lover. And I happen to love to teach people and educate them and talk and share knowledge and learn new stuff as well, which, you're not stopped from doing that in the lab. But when you're a people person and you're inside a lab all day, you don't have very much social skill use needed there. And I happen to like to use my social skills. And the thing is, what a lot of people don't seem to understand is that scientists, if you go read these scientific papers, you'll see that they're very narrow in what they're looking for. They have a specific type of research that they're doing, one little tiny piece of the puzzle. So I love the idea of having someone that can come in and take all those little puzzle pieces from all the research that's being done all around the world, because lots of people are looking at pesticides and what they're doing, because the makers aren't really so much interested. They used to be more interested in that, but now they just want to hide everything about how bad they are. So research kind of shows the truth. But we have people all over the world that are doing research and publishing their results, and they're all little pieces of the puzzle. When we can have someone that can take all those pieces of the puzzle and look at it in a big picture where we try to find patterns, we try to put it together with what we already know for sure about the human body, what we already know maybe from long term, what we've learned, like, oh, in the beginning, DDT is good for me, kind of a thing. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, by the way, everyone, silent spring, it's pretty much destroying the planet. And we all just act like, oh, that was an isolated incident. And all those other pesticides that we thought were safe that we got rid of, some that we brought back. Yeah, we all thought those were safe in the beginning. And then, after we use humans, animals, and our environment as our lab and our little guinea pigs to test on, yeah, that's right. We're being used as the guinea pigs, everybody, because there is no long-term safety testing done on this. And if you think our government's over there testing the safety of these toxins, forget it. Okay, they don't do that. All right, they just take whatever the maker gives them, the research that they did, and they look at it and they go, this looks good, approved. So that's pretty much how it works. So what we're going to do today is we are going to take the mind of someone that has been diving into this, I mean, like head first for a while now, and just has the capacity to go through this research and not just understand it, but retain it. Some of us, we may be able to understand it at the moment, but retain it, maybe not. And as we keep adding more and more research that has been reviewed, taking this and starting to make some hypotheses, and then from there, we're trying to find even more research and conclusions to fit and support the hypotheses. So we're kind of, doing that, but then we have other things that we can go, hey, not only are we finding it here, but guess what? Monsanto knew that through their own research and had that research hidden from the public. And it's now coming out as like the Monsanto poison papers, or within the Dwayne Johnson versus Monsanto court case, where we subpoenaed their emails and all this correspondence they have. And guess what? We found out they were lying to us. Blatantly lying. They knew it caused cancer decades ago. All right? So now what we're doing is we're kind of, until we can get rid of this stuff and find alternatives, right now we're trying to just figure out what the heck is happening to us, to our environment, to animals, all the people, all the things that are being exposed to this, our air, our soil. And how is that influencing, again, the big picture? How is that influencing global warming? How is that influencing our short and long-term health? How is that influencing our yields and our ability to produce food 10, 20, 30, 50 years from now? Because it is influencing it. But there's one thing that Dr. Seneff and I agreed was a huge red flag to us, and we actually found it very upsetting. And that is like birth defects for one thing, the rise in autism, and also the fertility rates that came out last year, I mentioned on the show, were like the lowest. It's actually the lowest in 30 years. And there's groups that have lower rates that shouldn't have lower rates, like those in their 30s, which were actually going up. So I don't think that those women have abandoned their desire to have children in their 30s. I think they're having trouble doing it. And so we are going to go over today. We're going to get into some research, and we're going to relate it to you and your body and how you may be feeling, and what we're thinking might be happening. So you're going to get it. Trust me. It's not everyone's going to get it. But we're going to be getting into this, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Seneff, and we're going to start. I'm just going to let her go and start getting into this and set the stage for what she has found, what she's thinking, and what kind of how she's relating this to other things that she's seen. So, Dr. Stephanie Seneff, welcome to Smart Health Talk, and love that tan you got going, girlfriend.
Yeah, I'm lucky, very lucky to be able to escape the Boston winter. I'm over here in Kauai enjoying the albatross, and it's just wonderful. So
I know you are. I am so jealous. And you just have that glow about you, and you look fantastic. I can tell you've been taking care of yourself. And just your smile. I mean, I can tell that you're feeling pretty good right now, aren't you? Wait, hold on. We can't hear you. Nope. Okay.
Oh, shoot.
Okay, there we are. Now we gotcha.
Okay, whoa. That was a bit of a scare there.
I know. All of a sudden you were like a million miles away at an echo chamber somewhere.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, you were saying, I asked you, that if you were feeling pretty good, because you're looking good and you look like you're feeling good.
I am, yes. I mean, I'm feeling good about what I'm learning. It's terrifying because I feel like we have to basically stop everything we're doing and shift directions, because if we don't move quickly, I think it's going to be game over perhaps for humans. I mean, I really feel there's a huge threat here, and we need to get on board. People need to realize they need to make big changes, and they need to do that fast. And America's capable of that. I mean, our country right now is the worst in terms of the amount of glyphosate. So glyphosate is the chemical you've been talking about. I think you said that, but I'm not sure if your listeners picked up on that. Roundup, which you use to kill the dandelions in your yard, it's all over the food supply. The U.S. government doesn't care because it's quote-unquote perfectly safe for humans. And that is a big fat lie. I have realized that in spades. I mean, at this point, I'm very confident that I'm right, and I'm doing everything I can to get my message out, because I think it's a sense of urgency that I feel. That if we don't move fast, I mean, we could become extinct. I mean, you mentioned the infertility issue, and that's just only going to get worse. We've got the lowest, very low rates of pregnancy among teenagers these days, and dramatically dropping. And I don't think that's accidental. And I don't think that's just because they're practicing safe sex. I think there's something else going on. Very, very worrisome. And I'm very fascinated by glyphosate and all the different ways that it's disrupting our biology. It's so complicated, and it's extremely interesting. And I'm a person who likes puzzles, and this is like the biggest puzzle you're ever going to encounter, is trying to figure out the intersection between glyphosate and human physiology and how it disrupts all these metabolic processes that are causing all these diseases, which are going up dramatically in step with the dramatic increase in the use of glyphosate on our core crops. It's so obvious to me that this is happening, and I absolutely do not understand why others are not seeing it. It just seems so blatantly clear that anytime a country starts adopting a Western diet, they start getting diabetes, they start getting obesity, Alzheimer's, autism, ADHD, food sensitivities. All these things start showing up once they start adopting a Western diet. And people can say, well, processed food is bad for you, but it's much more than processed foods. It's actually just basically a chronic exposure to a very toxic poison that is accumulating in your body over time and disrupting everything.
That's a really good way to say it. And I just want to go back to what you said in the beginning, Dr. Seneff, that we have to change course right now. And we have to start re-looking at how we're doing everything if we're going to beat this thing, if we're going to ever be able to catch up with it, let alone get ahead of it. And it's unfortunate that I was just told that earlier today, that Senator Dianne Feinstein told a group of kids when they were asked if she would support the new Green Deal, she pretty much told them, you can just forget it. It's never going to happen in 10 years.
Uh-huh.
And that is something that I'm sorry, I'm not going to sign up for that way of thinking whatsoever, because I happen to think that we can really go out there and make some incredible things happen. I don't know if I had mentioned on another show that they now can make a satellite that was as big as a semi-truck, the size of a loaf of bread. It took 10 years to make that satellite, and they can now make this new satellite that has everything in it that semi-truck satellite had in it, in a size of a loaf of bread, and it took a few months to make it versus 10 years.
Wow.
They have over 400 million pictures of the planet from this company, a private company that's way outdoing our government. And they have a picture of the entire planet every single day, Stephanie.
Wow.
Every single day. We can do that right now. So that to me says who even knows? And I told you Marshall Madoff. I always get Madoff. He's like the guy that got busted, Madoff.
Oh, yeah.
It's his last name, but he is a genius, and he's figured out how to take the energy out of cellulose. The like second most plentiful substance that we have on the planet, and make energy and plastic that has an expiration date that will degrade after 90 days or 6 months, whatever you want. I mean, it's just
plastic
incredible.
Alone is a huge issue all by itself, and if we could simply replace it with something that could work very much the same way but was degradable, that would be so awesome.
Yes, and this is what he's found. And I can't even find, I told you, they had it up from 60 Minutes. It was a 60-minute, and now it's gone. Now you can't even get to it. So I just wonder about some of the forces out there that are, what I hear from Dianne Feinstein's mouth, it makes me think that that's just a repetition, a repeat of what other people are saying. And they're saying it in a way where they're saying, just like the bovine growth hormone, there were reporters that tried to tell everyone about that years ago, and they were fired.
I know. I mean, it's just amazing how the mainstream just locks out this kind of information that's so vital for the survivability of the long-term survivability of our species and of the planet. And
it's only that, right?
I know. And then these people just are determined to make sure that people cannot get that message because they've got some product that they're making a lot of money on and they don't want it to be at risk, is basically what the story is in all these different dimensions. I'm becoming interested in the whole concept of electric cars, and I don't know yet. I mean, I'm sure there's some dark side to electricity, and I'm wondering about EMFs.
There's a dark side to the batteries.
Yes, exactly. So that's an issue. But on the other hand, the gasoline is extremely toxic. I was just looking this morning at studies in China, big cities in China and in Mexico City, where they're showing that exposure to, all the fumes is causing, for example, reducing the IQ of children. So, I mean, it's just like,
people die from air pollution. Millions.
Yeah,
millions of people are dying from air pollution alone.
Exactly,
and we don't talk about that.
Couldn't we do that differently? I mean, maybe we should go back to bicycles. We pay such a huge price for our conveniences, and we just don't recognize that price because it's it happens slowly over time, and somebody's diagnosed with cancer, too bad for them, it was just their bad fate. I mean, it isn't. It's because they were exposed to those toxic chemicals, and people don't connect those dots. It's frustrating to me that people don't recognize that if you got rid of those things or reduced the levels, you would have a huge benefit in terms of just the happiness of the people in the world. All of these people are coping with all of these serious diseases that are so painful and so debilitating.
And so expensive.
That we need to do that, if we could find a better way. And certainly with respect to the food, to think that, we're poisoning ourselves and causing all these diseases just for the sake of not hiring somebody to pull weeds just seems absurd to me. Okay, you pay a little more for the food, but you tremendously reduce the medical costs, and you're so much happier if you're not in pain all the time, or you don't have a child with autism. I mean, it's like, to me, it's a no-brainer which way you'd want to go, and yet it's so difficult to get us on board with that idea,
Well, why don't you explain some of the mechanisms? Because I found some things out too that I wanted to share with you, and I'm gonna try to interject them in between when you're explaining everything. Why don't you go ahead and just give people an idea on, okay, we're spraying this Roundup glyphosate, and people don't realize that Roundup isn't the only product that's using glyphosate. That's just a name on the product. There's like hundreds of formulations of all different names out there that also have glyphosate in there. So we're getting it, and the amount that's being used, it's just like astronomical. And I love how you put that about the weeds. I mean, that is like so perfect. But go ahead and explain to everyone about this glyphosate, like if you can help give people the some sort of a something to relate to on the amount that we're using, and then what we're starting to see as the results of this, and then some of the abnormal kind of things that you're starting to think could be happening as a result of so much of this pesticide going into our body, and then what is happening when it actually gets into our body. What kind of things can happen at that point?
That's a huge
that one's a biggie. That one's a biggie. But we're gonna kind of get into this this concept that Dr. Seneff and I are both really interested in. And after I listened to Dr. Hayes talk about the mechanism of atrazine, on how it's actually changing the sexual orientation of our children through large doses of estrogen exposed to the fetus in the womb, that's one mechanism. But what we're learning is there's actually multiple mechanisms that can be affecting the sexual orientation of our children. We don't realize how delicate this whole balance is on how everything is supposed to be happening, this cascade of hormones and chemicals that are produced during the pregnancy and the birthing process as well. And so I'm going to let Stephanie kind of go ahead and set the stage for all that, and I'm going to work on going back over my notes so I can make sure I have all these other I get these other things in that I wanted to tell you. So go ahead, Stephanie, and take a shot at explaining all this to us.
And Tyrone Hayes I know him. He's a great guy, and I've heard him give talks, and he's really brought to the world the message of the toxicity of atrazine with regard to messing up the development of the sexual organs, and that's certainly being seen very clearly in the frogs and the tadpoles and whatnot that he's been studying. And I think glyphosate is doing something very similar through a different mechanism. It's disrupting our sexual development, and of course it's also causing infertility, but also causing it's just amazing to me how many people we have today who are transgender, which is something I didn't know existed until not that long ago, maybe 5 years ago. And the idea of not being being in conflict between your sort of mental concept of your gender and your physical body just seems horrendous to me, to be in that kind of a situation. I don't mind that people are transgender. I don't have any kind of stigma against them, but the fact is it's a very difficult situation to be in, and it does not feel normal. And to recognize and then to look at the developmental process and how fascinating it is as far as how it works. It's actually remarkably simple in a way, but it can be severely disrupted by these chemicals that get in the way of certain milestones that are supposed to happen as that development takes place, and cause a tremendous disruption in the way that things develop. And it can, of course, end up with infertility as the most obvious consequence, but also just a complete confusion about your gender, a complete disconnect between your mental gender and your physical gender, which can be very disrupting for your sense of self and everything. So, it just seems very horrendous. But glyphosate, glyphosate is Roundup, and Roundup is what you buy to kill the dandelions in your lawn. It's also used enormously on our food supply. The U.S. uses more per person than any other country in the world. We were first and grandest with respect to Roundup. We thought it was a wonderful solution to making food efficiently and, in fact, cheaply. And we have the cheapest food in the world. When you look at the percentage of your income that's spent on food, the U.S. does the best. Yay. But we're paying a huge price for that because we have by far the most expensive healthcare system. We have huge problems with our health and a medical system that's completely failing us. I feel right now people have many exotic diseases that the medical professionals don't know how to treat. They're feeling a sense of helplessness. I think all of this is happening Glyphosate is a major, major contributor to this. It's not that it's the only chemical in the environment that's a problem, but it's I think it's the most important one. And the reason is because it's so pervasive. It's all over the food supply, and it's perceived as being non-toxic to humans. And so that's just a very dangerous combination. Are you still there?
Oh, yeah, I'm listening to you. I'm listening to you. Absolutely. I want you to go on and explain all this. Just go.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I recognized that I was looking for a solution for the autism epidemic, to be honest with you. And I was very worried. I mean, 12 years ago or so, I started looking into autism in a serious way, and I started reading all about it, and I started looking at different chemicals. Is it this? Is it that? And was really feeling quite frustrated. About maybe 6 years ago, I felt like I understood a lot about autism, something going on with the gut, very disrupted gut microbiome, lots of gut issues. Something's causing that, and I don't know what it is, was the feeling that I had. And I happened to hear a talk by Professor Don Huber at that time on this chemical called glyphosate. And at the time, I did not know what glyphosate was. It's kind of hard for me to believe that now because I just think about it all the time.
I hear you.
Yeah, so I heard this 2-hour talk, and I was like, wow, this is it. I mean, I was like, it was a total epiphany for me. This is it. And I have never deviated from that course since then. I basically dropped everything else, read everything I could about glyphosate. The more I read, the more convinced I became. And then I found out it wasn't just autism, because there are all these other diseases that are going up dramatically, exactly in step with the dramatic rise in glyphosate. Perfect match. You know, it's extremely low probability of the correlation occurring by chance. 0.9, 0.95, 0.96 correlation coefficients. Absolute perfect match between the rise. When you look at the plot over time, over the past 20 years, all these diseases and glyphosate usage on core crops, perfect match. I mean, you have to think there is something going on here that matters. Now, you can't just say correlation doesn't mean it's a causation and dismiss that kind of data. You know, and if it's not glyphosate, then what is it? And I can't find anything else that's going up dramatically exactly in step with all these diseases. So if you say, okay, this chemical is causing all these diseases, if you take that hypothesis, then you say, well, how the heck could it? How could a single chemical cause so many diseases? And that's certainly a good question to ask. And you're almost in disbelief. No, it can't possibly be true. But I didn't take that attitude. I said, okay, there's something very, very strange about glyphosate that makes it a uniquely toxic chemical that can insidiously, cumulatively cause damage in such a way that you don't connect it to your disease, because it's a slow process. Things accumulate in your body. Damage is done slowly. Eventually you get some horrible disease, and you don't connect it to this last 20 years of eating foods that were contaminated with glyphosate. It's very difficult for you to make those connections. So you just think it's my bad luck that I got ALS, for example, you know? But
which is one of the things that we've talked about in the past on how you link the ALS to glyphosate.
Yes, I mean, that one works really well, and I've written a whole paper about it. It's quite remarkable. And the key is glyphosate's unique property as an amino acid analog of the coding amino acid glycine. It's the only chemical in the world that I know of that has this property. And it's also not it's not produced by any natural species. It's a completely product of the chemical laboratory. You know, it's a
so the glycine, this is one question that I had, the glycine that is in glyphosate, because there's an amino acid, the amino acid glycine, which is the smallest amino acid. But are there amino acids in other pesticides as well?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, glufosinate is an amino acid analog of glutamate. And I think it has a very similar mechanism of toxicity as glyphosate. Glufosinate is another herbicide. And they're using more and more of it because glyphosate is starting to fail. They have a lot of glyphosate-resistant weeds showing up, so they're starting to have products that either mix together glyphosate with other herbicides, and glufosinate is one that they've got now, glufosinate-resistant soy through genetic engineering. So we're going to start to see a whole new set of diseases that are connected to glufosinate substituting for glutamate during protein synthesis. And I have not done the research yet to see extensively. I do know that glufosinate is connected to microcephaly, and that's probably through a mechanism by which it substitutes for glutamate in certain critical enzymes, critical proteins that are involved in brain development.
Well, so and explain to people what you mean about the substitution, because this was one of the things that we were talking about as far as the misincorporation of the glycine analog protein. And explain to people how that's happening in simple terms so we can just understand how it's like just plugged in there. We eat it, and like when we're eating glyphosate, say glyphosate is in food.
Yes.
And we eat that. Then somehow the enzymes in our body are breaking the glyphosate down and severing off and isolating a glycine amino acid.
No, they're actually keeping the glyphosate completely intact. It is a glycine molecule, but it has some extra stuff stuck onto its nitrogen atom. So it's an enhanced glycine molecule. It's a perfect match to glycine as far as the fact that it has no side chain. So it fits perfectly into this pocket where glycine is supposed to go.
In our own protein chains in our body.
So when you're assembling a protein according to the DNA code, so what happens is the DNA code is the famous 3-letter code out of the 4 letters of the DNA. You know, all the nucleo. This is basically the genetics of your body has this sequence of 4 letters that goes in different patterns, and the 3 out of the 4 letters, a 3-letter sequence codes for a specific amino acid. There's about 20 amino acids. The code is redundant because there's 64 possible codes, but so the GG, if you have a code GGX, where X can be any of the 4 numbers, it codes for glycine. So when you're looking at the sequence of nucleotides in the DNA. When you're assembling a protein, you basically build it like beads on a string or like paper dolls holding hands. And each one of those paper dolls is an amino acid, and there's about 20 of them. And so the machinery actually looks up the code and says, oh, okay, I've got this GG sequence, I better put a glycine here. And it has a pocket where it matches, so it makes sure that it's glycine. It's not any of those other amino acids. It has to be glycine. But that pocket only matches the part of glycine that works perfectly with respect to glyphosate. So it says, oh, this is a perfect glycine molecule. Happens to have some extra stuff sticking out there on that nitrogen atom. But we don't care. It matches beautifully. No side chains on the carbon. So we're going to go ahead and put this in. And when it does that, the glyphosate becomes embedded into the protein that's being assembled in place of glycine. So now that protein is no longer the same protein as it would have been had it coded correctly. It's an error in the protein translation from the DNA to the protein sequence. So it's a misfit because once you put that glyphosate there, it's very different. The protein has very different behavior from what it would have had with the glycine instead of the glyphosate.
Well, and go over like some of the main things that are proteins in our body. So people think of protein, they just immediately think of muscle,
right?
And they don't realize how protein is a part of pretty much everything.
The proteins are really totally the workhorses of the body. They're the enzymes, they're the transporters, they're the receptors.
They communicate.
Insulin is a protein, so hormones. Insulin is a protein, and various hormones are proteins. Glutathione is a protein. It's a tripeptide amino sequence, and glutathione is this antioxidant in the liver that's very important. It's just pretty much everything that is done in biology almost everything is done by proteins. They are really, really, really important.
Protein is like the signature on the outside of every cell that pretty much identifies that
cell. They have those glycoproteins, and they have those glycosaminoglycans attached to them, which are those complex sugar chains. They're attached to these proteins that are bound to the membrane of the cell. You also have collagen, for example. Collagen is a protein. It's the most common protein in the body. Something like 25% of the proteins in the body are collagen molecules. Collagen is the glue, right? It's in the what's called the fascia. It's in the bones, in the skin, in the joints, in the brain.
I've got it, Dr. Seneff. We need to start explaining to people that glyphosate causes wrinkles.
Probably, yeah.
If it's destroying the collagen, then that's making your skin get flatter and aging you faster.
The opioid drug epidemic, because you have so many people that get hooked on opioid drugs because they've got tremendous back pain or hip pain or shoulder pain, and they're taking opioid drugs to try to cope with the pain, and they get addicted because of these. The industry had this marketed this pharmaceutical prescription drug as being not addictive, when in fact that was a lie. And now you have all these people that are hooked on opioid drugs, and many of them are dying from overdoses. We have a complete epidemic that's gotten dramatically worse in the last few years. And I think glyphosate is to blame for that to a large extent, because people are taking all these drugs to cope with all the pain that they're experiencing because their collagen is misfolding, because it's getting contaminated with glyphosate. Collagen has the particular sequence of collagen that builds this beautiful triple helix structure that it has, which has tremendous properties, elastic strength and flexibility, and strength and flexibility and ability to hold water, which is really important. All depends upon this structure, this triple helix structure, which is based on every third residue being a glycine. So 1/3 of the amino acids in those segments of collagen are glycine residues.
And if that's been replaced with Roundup,
yeah, tremendous
glyphosate.
opportunity for glyphosate replacement, which is going to cause it not to be able to fold into triple helix and not to have all those beautiful properties. That's going to cause joint pain, bone pain.
Well, let's get into
the
the double sex and this very special protein, now that we've kind of laid the groundwork for proteins in our body. And this is a DMRT1 protein,
Right.
which is actually a gene, and it helps to does the gene help to make the messenger RNA, or does it help the RNA to express itself?
Okay, I think you're asking this at a lower level than I'm willing to apply. It's really interesting because the sex is determined, as you know, by the XY. So when you have XY, those are the single chromosome that's different between the male and the female. The female has 2 X's and the male has an X and a Y. The Y chromosome is a very unusual special chromosome that only exists in the males. And so XY determines male. But the fact is that you can be XY and still be female, which is quite remarkable. You can turn out, in terms of your expression as a female, even though you have XY, perfectly fine, which is quite amazing to me. Your Y exists and is perfectly healthy, and yet you're still a female. Rare, very rare. But this can happen if this protein DMRT1 is misbehaving. In fact, if it's genetically altered such that it's not able to express itself, then the female dominates. Even though the Y is trying to develop testes during development, it starts out trying to make the testes, and then it gets aborted because this DMRT1 is not expressed. DMRT1 maintains you in the sexual orientation that you're supposed to be. So the XY starts out by determining, okay, we're going to turn this fetus is going to develop into a male. But then DMRT1, if it doesn't kick in, it reverts back to female. And you can become a female it's amazing with these Japanese rice fish, this study that I read about, which is so fascinating, that if they don't have a working DMRT1, when they're developing, they start out to be male, and then they revert back into female, and they produce versions of this species that are actually able to reproduce. So they're not very fertile. They don't have very many eggs. They're not doing so well as a female, but they are female. They're totally female, which is quite amazing to me, even though they're XY.
Well, this I wanted to read what they actually gave us the definition for what that what that actually what that actually does. And I had it. It says okay, the DMRT1 needs to be cleared rapidly.
Yes.
After it is expressed during male spermatogenesis. This happens through binding to the beta TRCP. The binding site requires serine phosphorylation. If the glycine gets substituted, that was what you wrote. That was like, why don't you go ahead and explain what's happening there?
Yeah, so the DMRT. So in fact, it's very much similar to retinoic acid, which is also very, very important for development, as you know. Vitamin A, right? You can have major defects in development because of vitamin A toxicity, and this is something that people think is happening with glyphosate. There's studies that have shown that glyphosate causes major problems with the neural tube. You get things like anencephaly, and I've written a paper about anencephaly linking it to glyphosate as well. Again, it's sort of development of a neural system not going well at all because of dysregulation of retinoic acid. It's overexpressed because the whole thing is the timing, and so both DMRT1 and retinoic acid, they turn on at a certain critical point in development in the fetus, and they're produced in large amounts, and then they're quickly cleared. And you have to get that timing right, or things don't go well. So if you don't clear it, so you produce it and it triggers something to happen, and then you get rid of it, and then you can move on to the next stage. So if you trigger it and then you don't get rid of it, then you get into a lot of trouble with the development. And in fact, in particular with sperm, and this is after the person has matured. So this is a male adult. If they have a problem with turning off DMRT1, then what happens is that their sperm they mature as sperm cells very late. So it's really interesting, actually, that the female germ cells go into what's called meiosis very early in the fetus development, and the male ones don't. They wait until the very last minute to become meiotic, which is becoming a germ cell type of cell with only half of the DNA. That step takes place very late in males and very early in females. It's quite interesting to me because I think that's a step where you are sampling the environment and reacting to toxic chemicals and becoming mutated and all that kind of stuff. But when that sperm,
go ahead,
in the adult male is trying to mature at the moment when that the sperm is being generated, the DMRT1 is expressed, which gets it to go in, and then the DMRT1 has to be removed. And if it's not removed, then that process aborts and doesn't complete, and you don't end up with viable sperm. And the way you remove it is you bind the DMRT1 to this other protein called beta TRCP. It has to bind to that, and then that will target it for breaking it down and removing it. And biology is complicated in terms of the details, but basically, if it can't bind to beta TRCP, then it will stick around, and then the sperm will not mature.
Well, it says right here, Stephanie, it's just what you said. It says, we show that DMRT1 mRNA levels rise significantly beginning approximately 10 days after birth and remain elevated until after the third postnatal week. Therefore, mRNA levels drop coincident with the proliferation of germ cells in the testes.
Yes.
So that's saying that's decided pretty much right after the baby's born.
Well, that is not consistent with what I'm understanding with respect to the sperm. So the process is quite confusing as far as all the details. DMRT1 keeps both the male and the female in the right gender, basically, and it's active throughout life. But there are specific, when the sperm are being matured in the adult phase of the human, DMRT1 is overexpressed, like a lot of it is produced, and that's what kicks these sperm into this meiosis phase, and that they need to go into in order to become viable sperm. And then you need to get rid of that DMRT1 in order for the sperm to move forward to the next stage of meiosis. Otherwise, they don't do that, and you don't get viable sperm. So if you can't disable the DMRT1, remove it, you're in trouble. And you can't remove it if you can't attach this beta TRCP. And you can't attach that if you can't add phosphates to these serines. And that's where it gets interesting, because there's a glycine right next door to the serine. If that glycine is glyphosate, that's going to block the ability to add the phosphate to the serine. It's going to prevent that from happening, and then it's going to prevent the binding of that protein, which is going to prevent the breakdown of the DMRT1.
What I was saying is how you prime the pump. That what happens with that gene after the baby's born, that is secreted. It goes high. Right after the baby's born, because you're priming the pump, you're stimulating the testes to start the production of sperm at that point. And if that doesn't happen, then
it plays an important role at all the phases, and that's a different phase where you're just producing the sperm that are not yet in their meiosis phase, because that doesn't happen until much later. But you still have to make the sperm, you have to make the testes. You can't. You've got to make the whole male reproductive system, and DMRT1 dictates that process, and if it's not there, it won't happen. So it's both too much of it and too little of it that causes trouble, just like retinoic acid. The timing has to be
or the AMH levels, those AMH levels, and this was something that I thought was really interesting, because if they're too high, then you get the polycystic ovarian, syndrome? Is that
PCOS? Yeah.
Yeah, that you get that.
Right. Yes.
But if you have it too low and you don't have it the right amount, That's what causes miscarriages. That's what causes women not able to have enough of the chemicals that they need. And get this, Stephanie, this is what really blew my mind today that I learned. That one of the things that glyphosate does is it inhibits estrogen production.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Aromatase. It interferes with aromatase, which is a cytochrome P450 enzyme.
And
yes,
this is screwing women because that low estrogen is what's causing the miscarriages.
And the PCOS.
But get
PCOS
this.
is connected to high androgen, low estrogen. And so the aromatase converts the testosterone into estrogen. And if that's not working properly, then you have too much testosterone, both male and female.
And guess what I learned today that happens to the baby girl, the baby fetus when she's born. Because the mother had low estrogen, that means that baby, because this is what I keep trying to tell women nowadays, you are born with the eggs of your future children. You carry them with you every day of your life. But when the low estrogen happens, that baby is born with less eggs.
Oh,
so you have now sabotaged her ability to have children in the future.
That's very, very interesting. Thank you.
Is that diabolical or what?
That is really amazing. Yeah, and I believe it, right? It makes sense because it's what's really interesting about the male and the female reproductive systems to me is that it's fascinating to me that the female reproductive system is completely finished even before the female brain. Like very early in the fetal development, she gets busy with her germ cells for her next generation. She gets them all ready to go. Whereas the male doesn't mature his sperm until the last minute. It's so interesting that they are sort of as early as possible and as late as possible in the person's life, And I think that's intentional, that they're both sampling different phases of the environment, the earliest and the latest in the person's life to get information that's very different between what the information that the female female reproductive cells are getting compared to the male ones. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because when they go into meiosis is when they have an opportunity to do a lot of genetic change. And I think that genetic change is actually influenced by the environmental factors, that mutations will happen more in genes for proteins that are stressed, for example, in that environment.
Well, yeah, that was actually one of the things that was causing women to have even worse outcomes, was the whole stress thing. But I've always said for a long period of time that after I learned about mitosis in science class, I could not help but think that has to be the most vulnerable time for a cell when you're dividing.
Absolutely, and I think that's crucial. That's a sensitive time for damage. That's when you can get damage, and that's why, like the female germ cells in the fetus are all undergoing meiosis to produce all those eggs. The female produces all of her eggs very early during the pregnancy. It's really quite amazing to me, and that whole process is very vulnerable. So there was a study on glyphosate with mice that was really fascinating because they exposed pregnant mice starting, I think, at 10 days of pregnancy, throughout the pregnancy, throughout lactation. They exposed the mother mouse, to very low doses of glyphosate, doses so low that she was not affected. They couldn't find anything wrong with the mother. She produced offspring. They couldn't find anything wrong with those offspring either. And then when they looked at the next generation was when they saw trouble. It was really amazing. And they were suspecting that because they obviously designed the experiment to observe that. And they found that the children of the exposed mouse there were extremely high rate. There were 3 out of all the offspring from 3 different moms, 3 different lines, genetic lines that had extremely rare mutations, deformities because of extremely rare mutations in that germ line, which was exposed in the fetus during that pregnancy. It's really quite remarkable that it showed up in the next generation.
Judy Hoy, who just came out with her book about what she documented on changes in wildlife in Montana.
Changing Faces. Yeah, that's a nice book. I know her and I like that book.
Yeah, and she was, there was like a point in there too that what were you talking about before that? Because there was something that she was saying that was the same.
Oh, really? Before the second generation?
Oh, no. I just remember what it was. No, in Montana, they have like 2,500 births per year. And she said in one weekend, they had 3 rare chromosomal births in Montana in one weekend, which is like the odds of that happening are unheard of. But she was relating it to the potato pesticides.
Yes,
because they're drifting from Idaho onto Montana, and it was causing overbites and the wildlife, tumors.
Absolutely.
And she kept, one of the things I'll never forget is she said the squirrels, she said we used to make fun of them because they had big ones. And she said what was happening were these micro penises in the squirrels, the deer. Really, they couldn't eat. They can't have sex. Their scrotums were sideways. Their penises were smaller. It's just
she's done a lot of documentation of that. It's really quite disturbing to think about, and it's, again, she's not getting a whole lot of traction to get attention to this. She's observing. She's a very keen observer of the wildlife, and she's seeing all these problems. And you would think that somebody in her state would be interested in learning more about this.
They won't listen. They won't listen to her. But I wanted to also bring up that one of the things that I found, because I wanted to mention that how the man is having trouble contributing to the pregnancy as well as the woman.
Yes.
But I know that they found for sure that with DDT that it reduced the mobility.
Yes.
Not as the numbers maybe, but the mobility, the ability of the sperm to actually get there. Right. That was a big thing. And then another thing that I found was really interesting too was the thyroid influences as well, and then the obesity. And it's like all of these things are like feeding themselves. Because one is like adding to the obesity epidemic, and being obese is going to lower your chances of fertility as well. Or starving yourself. That also does as well. But I think that what I'm seeing is that all of these things, like you said, we can't go point to one specific thing, but what we're seeing is all of these things are feeding into this type of problem, where it's, it's all contributing, all these different factors.
Yeah, and glyphosate is also disrupting both sperm mobility and sperm count. There's studies that have shown that, and a study was done with different levels of glyphosate exposure, and it's showing increased effect with increased dosage of reduced mobility and reduced
then
count.
the magnesium, because that protein that you were talking about earlier. We have a chelation thing happening. Why don't you explain like what's happening with these mineral deficiencies? Like a magnesium deficiency is really a big problem right now, and that protein actually is built around a molecule of magnesium.
Are you thinking of the one in the plants, or?
No, the G. The
DMRT.
Yeah, that's actually built around a molecule of magnesium.
That's magnesium.
So if we have deficiencies in these minerals, then we're not even making these things.
And glyphosate binds to magnesium and makes it unavailable. I mean, that's been very clear from Don Huber's work. And there is that one in the plants, the rubisco, which is very interesting. That also binds to magnesium, and that's crucial for photosynthesis, which is taking carbon dioxide out of the air and putting it into organic matter. Rubisco is probably the most common protein in the world. It's only found in plants, but there's huge amounts of it in plants, and it's what is going to help to reduce the carbon dioxide burden in the atmosphere, which is, of course, a direct link to global warming. So glyphosate has been shown in multiple papers to suppress the activity of rubisco. And this doesn't surprise me at all, because it turns out it has 22 absolutely conserved glycine residues. I always look for how many conserved glycines. 22 is huge. I don't know of any other protein that has that many. And it also has the magnesium binding. And it also has 3 phosphate binding sites. And phosphate binding sites are where I suspect glyphosate causes the most trouble. So it's like rubisco is just, hopeless against glyphosate.
Well, so and this is all affecting carbohydrate metabolism, and things are growing faster. They're holding water instead of having nutrition in there, so we're getting empty food as well. Absolutely. Well, I can't thank you enough. Of course, darn, the hour's over. I'm so bummed.
That went fast.
I want to keep going. Well, thank you so much, Dr.
you.
Sana. Thanks for taking time out of your the time that you're spending over in Hawaii. So we have to end this with an aloha, my dear.
There you go. That's perfect.
Thank you for
Aloha.
everything. All right. Hey, everyone, thanks for tuning in to Smart Health Talk. We'll be back next Tuesday, 4 o'clock. And find us on social media and join us on YouTube, everyone. Bye.
Take a walk on the wild side.